It's hanging up, Vanessa. It's just preparing. It's not moving quickly. It is hanging up, Vanessa. It's not really doing anything.
We're live.
We are?
Mhm.
Okay, excellent. Because I'm not, okay, good. Going to this meeting is being live streamed. Good. Then my end was just hanging up. I'm going to hit recording. I'm going to admit all. Can someone confirm that Vanessa, you can confirm that we're live on YouTube? Vanessa,
Yes, we are live on YouTube, and now you can hear us in a loop here on my computer.
Okay, I'm getting unable to live stream on my end. That's okay, as long as you have confirmation. We're good.
Yeah, we should be all good.
Okay, AJ, you can bring the meeting to order.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the board's workshop on the EAB. We are going to go through some real quick meeting announcements and things like that, and then we'll hand it over to Anna Scott, who will begin with our meeting workshop. So the first thing I have on the agenda for today is announcements. Are there any announcements? All right. Hearing and seeing no hands, I would like to announce that this Friday is what is possibly the last of its kind. Oregon plays Oregon State for the final time, and then we're moving to different leagues. And so Friday is going to be a busy day around here, Eugene. So if you get a chance to support those Ducks, and I guess if you support the other team, come out and support Oregon Athletics. And I'm still seeing no hands, so we're going to go on to the agenda review. Are there any changes, amendments, or updates to the agenda for tonight? Well, these things are just moving right along here. Seeing no hands, we're going to go on to membership comments. Are there any membership comments before we get started? All right, you guys are making this job real easy now. No one has anything, no membership comments? Well, this just, okay, go
Well, I
ahead,
have a
Lisa.
quick comment. Is this an open meeting?
It is.
Okay, because I'm just a family. I just feel like I'm like the only one that's not a board member practically. Okay, well, thanks.
I'm not a board member.
Okay.
I'm not a board member.
And just to be clear,
I'm not a board member either.
Just to be clear, there are folks on the YouTube watching as well. All right, with that said, we have some extra time, it looks like, for the presentations. And so, welcome, Anna. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right, take it away.
Live from your space and ours, it's a board work session about Emerald Ash Borer, sponsored by our Land Use Management and Planning Committee, or LUMP for short. And EAB is what you're going to be hearing over and over again. So I want to say extreme thanks to the board of directors for helping to push this work session or workshop forward. Today, we're going to hear from some of our experts that have been meeting together in a subcommittee or task force about Emerald Ash Borer and what that means for our organization. So the purpose of this work session is awareness, and education for the board of directors and all of our folks that are joining here about the need to coordinate specifically the board of directors' fiscal and oversight responsibility with the fair's operations and management in order to implement a timely, proactive response to the threat of the emerald ash borer, or EAB, including funding and policy starting this budget cycle and continuing on into the future. Our quote that you'll hear again: the anticipated extent of the impact from the emerald ash borer is much greater than our current capacity to deal with it. So I want to set the table a little bit. We are here to assist you with getting awareness and education to make the kinds of decisions that make this organization vibrant and collaborative. So by setting the table, what I mean is that we've got some Q&A areas after each one of our sections. I'm going to put, or one of my conspirators here, collaborators, will put in the chat a link, and I'm perhaps will call on Vanessa here, that will guide you to the agenda with a couple of graphics that we'll use during the presentation. So our LUMP folks that are here, myself, I am chair of our 2023-24 Land Use Management and Planning Committee. We have Glenn Johnson, who will introduce himself briefly here. And I see that Kirsten has her hand up, but let me get through my introductions of our presentation team, then we'll take your question. John Alexander, whom the board is on our board of directors. Paxton Hogue, also on the board of directors and part of our liaison for our Land Use Management and Planning Committee. And myself. We also have available to answer in our Q&A, Kevin Hillary, fair arborist and ad hoc member of our LUMP committee. Kirsten, did you have something to say about setting the table or welcoming?
I just wanted to say I made you a co-host so you can share your screen at any time as you please. Thank you.
Great. Would you also make Glenn be able to share his screen, as he's got most of our slides, which will be available at the end of the meeting. I'm just going to check the
Absolutely.
chat.
I will do that now.
Thank you so very much, Vanessa, for putting that in the chat for everyone. Without further ado, I'm going to lead into what's next, which is the context. Go for Glenn. Unmute.
Thanks, Anna. And like Anna said, I'm Glenn Johnson. I work with the stewardship at an educational venue in Xanadu, and I sometimes guest star on the fair's wildlife team too. So I'll be talking about the ecological context and the reason why the fair is so susceptible to this this threat of the emerald ash borer. And I'm just gonna find my slideshow right there. Are you seeing my the full screen image or the presenter view?
We're seeing the presenter view.
All right. Sorry about this. Don't want to share the presenter view. Let's see, present.
I know this has been an issue for other people that I've presented with, so.
If you hit the little thing to the left of the Zoom, you see the Zoom bar, that guy right there. If you hit that, it'll turn it to slide presenter. You're right there.
There you go.
That's the one. Hit that.
Where? Okay. How's that look?
I'll give it a second. It has it. There we go. Good.
Yay!
All right.
Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Yes, I knew that. I really did. Okay. So so thanks everybody for coming. Just a quick note on the organization here. I'm going to talk about the ecological context of the fair site. what's at stake and why we're susceptible. Then we're going to go into the threats posed by the emerald ash borer, uniquely posing a threat to the OCF. We're going to go through some quick example strategies and try to frame these within the context of some options that we have. There's many other options and ways of dealing with this, ways to prepare for it. And the last part of our talk today is John Alexander is going to, John Alexander is going to help lead us through a potential strategic planning option for some that could include some rapid strategic planning and a bit longer term for planning for this. And I'm going to try to move through the context and the threats fairly quickly so we can have a little bit more time for questions and discussions, especially with the last piece of strategic planning. And Anna and Paxton will be joining me through different parts of this too. All right, so for the and these slides are not they're not super special. They're just something I put together as an organizational tool. So won't get too excited about those. But the main the Oregon Country Fair site's about 500 acres, and it's a riparian forest and wetland throughout a lot of the site. And one thing that I think that's important for everybody to understand is that the Long Tom River is really defines the site for us. It floods most winters a lot of the time, and that flooding that we experience as kind of like fun and different, that's a really good sign of a healthy functioning floodplain that sort of the fair site is providing the Long Tom River. It allows the flood waters to expand well beyond the defined channel and engage the floodplain and deposit sediment, move things around, and that's been the case likely for eons, where the Long Tom River is moving through the site, changing its course, engaging the floodplain, and through that dynamic natural influence on an almost yearly basis, changing up the site and changing what the conditions are, and therefore changing the conditions for trees and plants on the site too. So I think that's an important thing to point out. So the site, it contains a mix of forests and wet meadows, and those wet forests and wet meadows dry out each summer pretty severely. The forests on site are composed, especially those wet forests, are composed of Oregon ash mainly, but also with a lot of Oregon white oak and big leaf maple. And in addition to the floodplain forest, we have uplands, which are mostly comprised of Douglas fir, with some ponderosa pine mixed in. We have a native ponderosa pine that's native to the west side. There's just two populations of ponderosa pine, one in the southern Willamette Valley, one up in Puget Sound. And these are adapted for sort of west side conditions, very wet winters and hot, dry summers. And of course, the trees can kind of mix around. You'll find all of these species in the other area, but in general, you have the lower floodplain forest, which is comprised of deciduous trees and Oregon ash, white oak, maple, and in general, you have the uplands with the Douglas fir, but you have some mixing as well. So, now, as far as the context goes at the site, I took a screenshot here of a mapping effort that Rosanna Costello has been doing in collaboration with she's on the mapping committee of the Land Use Management Planning Committee. She's on a subcommittee for mapping, but she also works with our cartographers, and she put together a really great canopy map. She's mapping out the canopy of the Oregon Country Fair, basically. And so I'm going to try to share this other screen and see if I can.
Just while Glenn's sharing, I want to point out that the link to this particular resource is under is in our chat. For Lisa, it may not be there.
Did you get it in there? Oh yeah. Okay. So can you all see that the map there?
Yes.
Okay, so zooming out a bit, this is the Art Barn area up to the north of the fair property, Ware Barn over here. This area here is the main area of the fair. You know, there's the 8 in here, here's the Xanadu over here. Here's the parking lots out here, of course, Indian Creek coming in and emptying into the Long Tom River, which moves from the south and north through the site and out toward Fern Ridge. And this map is really interesting because the aerial imagery right around the fair was taken in the fall, and you can see, I'm going to go to this area in Xanadu here and kind of zoom in, and you can see that the ash trees here really stick out because they have this sort of light bluish gray lichen that really stands out. And a lot of the oak trees still have their leaves on them, these brown leaves. And so you can kind of get a sense, looking at these this imagery, the proportion of ash as compared to oak. And we have the maple trees here that are in yellow. So for example, you can see south of Miss Piggy's and south of the Maui and Wowie here, you have a lot of almost entirely ash. At least the upper canopy is almost entirely ash by that sort of light blue color. And moving over here, you can see that the oaks are, there's a band of oaks kind of moving from, there's small oaks and some oaks throughout the South Woods, and it kind of moves through Xanadu and through the main part of the fair, the 8 and up through main stage area. There's oaks mixed in this area. And I like to think of this as an oak woodland intermixed with ash. So we have a lot of oaks in there, but it's not the dominant component, unless you kind of zoom in and say, okay, Xanadu, yes, the oaks are the dominant component, and that spaced out oaks there with a lot of area in between them, that's more akin to a oak Xanadu. Sorry. So I think it's just important to look at this map or get a sense of the relative proportion of ash versus other trees. There's nowhere at the fair where people go, where the public goes, where you can't see ash in any direction. So it's not true of any other tree species, right? There's basically ash throughout anywhere the fair public visits, and most areas where the fair family camps, right? We're camping in and around the main areas of the 8, Xanadu, South Woods, and of course up into the uplands where Alice's is. But for the most part, we have an ash dominated system, but there's some cause for hope that we have a lot of these other, a lot of oak trees mixed in as well. And there's many thousands of younger oaks that are typically crowded out by the ash or don't always make it for various reasons. So I'm going to stop sharing that for the moment.
Just giving you a time check to let Paxton talk a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, Paxton, if you want to jump in now. Great.
I just wanted to mention that, and actually this area map is probably pretty good. The OCF Board of Directors established the Land Use Management Planning Committee, LUMP, in 1991. I was actually on the board at that time, a new member on the board, and voted for it, and charged its members with developing a comprehensive overview of the site, the plan for management. The board voted in 1998 to adopt land use planning as a guiding principle. And the section of land that we've identified as ours, LUMP has divided up, I believe, into 17 different zones with advisory, studies, what we're doing there, what we want to do in the future, things like that. And that has, there it is. And that has been really the guiding principle of the fair, is trying to follow these recommendations that have come out of the LUMP manual. And you can find it on the .NET website. our land use policies have basically been based on reverence for the land, no brush cutting, plant native species, designate, enhance, and protect green zones, maintain wildlife habitat, preserve and restore forest understory, maximize carbon sequestration, and temporary construction, and also primary, this is the health and safety of fair participants. And those are the reasons that we actually have developed the manual. So I highly recommend studying it. Now, in my opinion, the impacts of the emerald ash borer are drastically going to change how we look and view at the fair. And so the lump manual is upgraded all the time. We go through it section by section and upgrade sections as they need to. So it's well worth looking it up on the .NET website. It's under land use management planning and the lump manual and the land use planning documents. There's a kind of a link to a separate site where the lump manual exists.
I put a link in the chat, Paxton, to the lump manual.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The basic charge of lump was the country fair, in accordance with our policies and philosophies as stewards of the land, vow to restore and manage our lands and waters for the purpose of protecting and preserving its natural wonders, significant fields, forests, wetlands, rivers, and streams, with all of its wildlife in a natural state for the education, pleasure, and recreation of the public now and in the future. With this vision of stewardship, the site will be managed as a natural forest with its full cycle of birth, growth, senescence, and decay. And we will probably be observing a major change sometime in the next couple of decades. So thank you.
Thanks, Paxton. So just a few more. This is, like Paxton noted, this is a parcel map that's got some of the operational zones. The lump manual is sort of looks at the different areas of the fair, both ecologically and operationally, and kind of sets aside, like this main stage area and the 8 and the far side, for example, these different sort of units to think about how we use the land. And it provides perhaps a good jumping off point for thinking about how we're going to manage these different areas.
Glenn, I just wanted to take about a minute or so to give folks an idea about the historical and OCF traditional site management. We just heard a little bit about the OCF traditional site management, sort of a benevolent neglect. Prior to that, we had drained and tiled, not us, but the previous landowners had drained and tiled for different types of farming, usually hay, pasture. And previous to that, the land was managed in let's be able to grow food that supports our Native American way of living. And so we just briefly wanted to touch on that. There are some resources from the Long Tom Watershed Council, if you're interested, that dive more deeply into those particular details. Take it away, Glenn.
Okay. And I think the main point there too is that in the past, there's a lot of evidence that the Native Americans in the area burned the forest a lot more and opened it up for camas bulbs and camas flower, the purple flowers that are in the parking lots. They thrive under more open conditions. So by burning, they opened up the forest, reduced fuel loads, and created a more open forest condition. Again, this is going to be in a mosaic within the floodplain. There was probably always ash and oaks there together. But in the past, there's evidence that there was likely not as many ash and a lot more oaks and a lot more of an oak woodland. And just before I move away from ash, it does have some unique qualities that I think the fair community appreciates. It tends to dominate in these ash swales, clay soils areas, can outcompete oak, especially when there's no fires happening. So you tend to get these closed canopies, which really block out a lot of the invasive species growth. So blackberries and a whole host of other species that really thrive in the sun. The ash does a really great job of keeping those at bay. And also just that as you go into the fair and into the 8, say near Energy Park, when it's hot out, warm out, all that ash canopy really does a lot and puts a lot of moisture in the air, and it has a very sort of dank, fairy-like quality that some people really appreciate. We all do, I'm sure. So, so moving on to
Before we go to threats,
yeah, let's do that.
we
Go ahead.
promised that we would take some questions at the end of each one of these sections. So let's go ahead and stop the share and see if there's any questions from folks. Glenn, can you stop your share? So,
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Now I can see. Let's see. Anybody have any questions on this area? I'm just kind of looking around Zoom here. You can unmute if you have any. All right, I'm going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I think people are good, Glenn. Let's go moving on to the threats. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We want to be sure everyone's heard.
Yeah, and of course, if anybody has any questions about ecological context, we can talk about those at the end too, perhaps. Oops. All right. So I'm gonna. So the threat of the emerald ash borer. So working. Okay. So the emerald ash borer is a beetle native to Asia. And it affects the cambium layer of ash trees. The cambium being between the xylem and the phloem. And it impedes the ability of the ash to send sugar down to its roots. So it's what normally trees photosynthesize, and they send those sugars down the phloem into the roots. And when they get inside the cambium layer there, they disrupt the ability of the phloem to transmit sugar down to the roots. And through time, what happens is the ash tree stops sending resources back up to the highest parts of the tree, and the crown dies off. But so I think it was in the early 2000s, maybe I can't quite remember the year, but emerald ash borer was detected in the east, and it soon moved to the Midwest and has decimated forests throughout the eastern U.S. and the Midwest. In July or spring of 2022, spring of 2000 last year, we had detections near Forest Grove, Oregon, and the state of Oregon, with a bunch of partners, has mounted a pretty vigorous defense, a quarantine, and educational efforts to try to stop the spread of the emerald ash borer throughout Oregon. And in the east, in the Midwest, in the east, they found through research that the primary way that the emerald ash borer moved county to county, state to state, was through humans moving wood around, wood that contained the emerald ash borer. It wasn't through natural immigration. Now, once it's on the site, it can, of course, naturally spread. But the primary way it infected new areas was through people moving it around. So that's why there's such a vigorous effort to try to stop that. And so being that, Oregon ash is a major component of our shade forest cover at the fair, we're very susceptible to this beetle. So here's just some photos of a few aspects of what happens. So, and this is the primary thing you look for if you're not an entomologist, is crown dieback. When you start to see the tops of trees not leafing out, right? So we're not talking about brown leaves. That's pretty common at the fair. You'll have ash trees will develop spots and they'll start losing leaves. That's not a sign of emerald ash borer infection. That's just a normal stress response if there's drought, for example. But when you have trees not leafing out in the spring and remaining dead, that's your first sign. This is a tree. This tree here is an Oregon ash from Oregon, taken by one of our partners on the Oregon Invasive Species Council.
Wow.
And this is, this year. So they detected it last year, but it had already had a head start. And by this year, this is what this ash tree looked like. So the message there is it can take 4 to 10 years and before like an emerald ash borer will infect a site, and then 4 years you'll start seeing a lot of sign crown dieback. Within 10 years, at some sites, at least in the East and Midwest, the ash forest is basically gone. It's decimated. So it can be pretty quick and pretty hard, and so hard on the trees and the people around the trees. This is not the greatest image, but you can see here, this is the bark peeled off. And the feature about emerald ash borers that's so bad is they do these S-shaped tunnels in the cambium. A lot of beetles will just have a straight line and not kind of go everywhere. And the effect of all that S curving around under the bark is that it effectively girdles the tree and just prevents the transmission of sugars down to the roots. So this is another bad image, but you can see here, within just a few years, this ash canopy in Ohio was decimated. I think it's 3 years. So here's another image of crown die off and ash dying within this forest, and the ones that are left are not ash. So this is a summertime ash forest. So that's a little bit about the threats. And again, the timeline is, right now it's in, right now, it's been detected and they're doing a pretty good job of keeping it quarantined in and around the Forest Grove area, but there has been new infections. The state of Oregon has got like a ring of fire around the infected sites. They have trapped trees set up around the entire area that's infected. So if we're lucky, they'll be able to kind of keep containing it. So we don't know how many years we have before it'll show up in the southern Willamette Valley. There's a lot of different variables there. But amongst our team, the EAB subcommittee, if we're not lucky, it could be here anytime within a few years. And if we're lucky, maybe it'll take 10 years. We really don't know. Once it arrives, it'll probably be a year or two before we can detect it, unless it shows up in our traps that we've set up. But then, a year or two before it's detected, and then a year or two later, we're seeing some, crown dieback on trees. And the first thing that's going to happen is the crown, they're going to die, and those big limbs at the top are going to be ready to fall. And we're going to have to start thinking about moving people, cutting down trees. One of the threats is that this is, after the crown dies back and you realize what's happened, it's very dangerous to cut a tree. Even if the lower part of the tree is still alive, the upper part with those large limbs can be, very dangerous to cut. So that's one of the many challenges with this. So let's see. I think Paxton, you want to talk about wood being brought to the site?
Yes, I can. Last year we pushed a guideline to try and minimize and educate people as to what kind of wood we felt we needed to keep from being brought on site, because we had no control of where it's coming from in reality. I ran into a situation when I followed a load of wood in, and it became obvious that greeters didn't know how to deal with it. So we do have a problem, and we need to do some more education on how stuff like that is. We're also looking at kind of reinforcing the guidelines by adding another or working on a guideline change to change it more directly to eliminating bringing wood with bark on site. That is the major thing that we need to be concerned about right now, is that because that's the way the beetle gets in. If it's milled and finished wood, it's not really problematic. If it's got a live edge, it is somewhat problematic. If somebody kiln dried it then and finished the edge, it would probably be useful for counters or something like that. But we're really trying to say that no wood with bark be brought on site. Another thing that brings us into consideration that as a fair, as we need to think about, is if we're doing that, we need to start managing our site for our own firewood consumption, because we actually do use a lot of wood during the fair time. And so that becomes, something that we will need to think about here coming up in the near future of how do we look at managing our own and we have a lot of ash trees that we need to, in the long run, look at managing. So it's something that I think is a future topic of growth here at the fair. The key right now is to keep wood with bark off-site.
Thanks, Paxton. And the, I think, this keeping wood off the site, is part of a strategy that there's an acronym for it. Slow ash mortality, or SLAM, and it's basically like try to keep people from moving live edge wood around, try to keep people from moving ash firewood around, and that's your kind of biggest strategy, to have more time to plan for it, to have more time to grow trees, to have more time to plan for what you're going to do when it shows up. So that slowing ash mortality is a key strategy that I think hopefully we can embrace sooner, and we already have embraced it, I think, as an organization. And it's that the guideline change and starting to look at wood that's coming on site this last year was a great example of sort of getting up to speed very quickly. There's many other areas where we could kind of coordinate our capacities and support operations with whether it's the Vegmanics. They've done a great job of through the decades stewarding our site. They've also have a nursery where they currently have about 600 native trees from the site. That's another example strategy of how to deal with this. But anyway, I guess back to the threat aspect. One of the threats that this poses on us is that we're just haven't planned for it, haven't thought about it up till this last year or so. And so that's a threat that other land managers in the Southern Willamette Valley, they manage, hundreds of acres or thousands of acres of ash forest, but they're not trying to have a festival underneath the trees, and so that's a unique thing for us, is that we're not just concerned about the ecological function of the ash on our site. We're concerned about moving people in there and welcoming people underneath ash trees that may die soon, or may start shedding huge limbs at first. So that's sort of a unique threat for us, is that we're not just managing a site for ecological values. So I think we could go kind of more into the threats, but I think what we'll do is we'll take questions right now, and then we can go into some example strategies and then a long-term planning discussion.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Paxton. So now I'm looking around Zoom. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, or if you're extremely Zoom literate, you can go down to the reactions area and click on that, and you can see that you've got a raise hand option that pops up. Again, down at the bottom of your Zoom area, there's a smiley face with a plus, and then there's a raise hand option. I'll see you if you want to just raise your regular hand as well. So I'm looking around Zoom to see if there's questions about our section on threats. And I have Glenn first, Glenn G. Go for Glenn, and then we'll take Dean.
Hi, Glenn Vegmanic here. I think one of the threats, and one of the things I've been struggling with, and I've been watching since Xanadu, since we moved into the South Woods, this whole idea of no brush cutting seems to be barely given lip service. I know how easy it is to take a power tool and put it close to the ground and take care of something and kill trees, baby trees. Some of them would be viable. I'm kind of in a space of trying to like looking for support. We're going to need to reinvigorate the earnestness in which we mean no brush cutting. I understand that we've got other things to manage, but generally people are going in and they're just clearing spaces, and year after year, baby trees are dying like that, and people don't know it. Now, if it's an ash tree, of course, there's only so much. But like when there's all sorts of baby trees on the forest floor. And since we moved into the South Woods, let's just say the discipline of our crews and our fair in general has been kind of on the wanting side, let's say, when it comes down to how we're really managing it. And some of our crews, I'm on a crew that does damage. I know I'm a Vegematic, right? But we've got site crew doing it and we've got camping crew doing it too. And I don't think we have a unified vision on how to walk our talk. And that kind of puts us in league with the threat if we're not nurturing the youngins, because if we don't save what's naturally planted, we're gonna have to plant it ourselves.
Hey, Glenn, did you have a question we wanted to answer? Because those are awesome comments, and we really appreciate that.
I don't have, no, I'm putting the call out. If there's any business I have here doing that, it's gonna start bringing consciousness to that.
Copy that.
I think we need to start giving ourselves credit for being a threat to all of this, because how we behave around the youngins, and not our youngins, the tree youngins, right, is going to affect how much work we're going to have to kind of backtrack, because every tree that's not growing on its own is something that we're going to have to plant.
Thanks, Glenn. I got 4 ahead of you. Next, Dean.
Thanks, Anna. I just wanted to ask a question about why it's difficult to bring the trees down once they have died off.
Glenn, do you want to take that, or should we tap on Kevin?
Yeah, we can tap on Kevin if he's ready for that.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, hey, Dean. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because if a tree dies from emerald ash borer, it is very different than if a tree dies naturally. It dies really fast. The emerald ash borer is incredibly successful at reproducing, and so they put hundreds and hundreds of holes in the trees. And there's even research that they're carrying a wood decaying fungus with them. So arborists from the eastern part of the United States are saying that if a ash tree is showing 30% dieback of the tree, that it is no longer safe to climb it, that it is too brittle to be called safe to climb. So it's unique. It's very different from any other dead or dying tree, and it's just very dynamic on how they die so fast.
So that's part of it. I think it's a safety issue, you know, with the brittleness of the trees and limbs falling down on the person who's cutting it. And then there's the scale issue. There, you know, if we wait till our trees are infected, then we're going to have a massive job ahead of us. And then also, if we wait, we won't have grown up the young trees that are the non-ash trees that we might have or that we might plant. So it's kind of all of those together. But yeah, it's a good question.
Thanks, Dean. Got AJ next.
Hello. So I have kind of a three-parter. The first question is, how long has the beetle been in the United States? The second question is, are there treatments that are currently being used to protect the trees that are affected? And then the third question is, are there things that we see in the immediate future, for instance, this year, that we can do to get prepared? understanding our limitations around budget.
Let me take the last one first, and then I'll let the experts in the room. So AJ, we're going to be moving and talking about first example strategies next. And so let's, if it's okay with you, we'll talk more about that. And if your question isn't answered, please raise your hand again. The other two questions, Kevin or Glenn want to dip into those, please do.
Sure, I can tell you it arrived in 2002 in Detroit was the first detection, and it kind of spread from there. And I missed the middle part of your question again. Can you remind me what that was, Anna?
Yeah, so are there any, I mean, that goes into what your answer is about. It arrived in Detroit in 2002, so that's 20 years. Are there any, since then, any treatments that have been developed to protect the ash tree from this beetle?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I can.
go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I can take that. Just to start out with, it was detected in Detroit in 2002, but it arrived much sooner. So it arrived in the 90s in Detroit. So which is interesting, by the time you see it, it has already been there and spread and causing destruction. So it could already be in other parts of Oregon, and it probably is. It's just not killing trees. And that's the problem with the beetle, is by the time you see the effect of it, it's infected. They've already spread and are successful. As far as treatments are concerned, there is an injection of the tree, so that's not an aerial spray. It's you actually inject it in the tree. That is quite successful, very expensive, and you have to do it every 3 years for the entire life of the tree. One of the things about the emerald ash borer is it's here, and it's not going away. It will never go away. We will. It's part of our ecosystem now. So if it works really well in some areas in the urban forest where you've got such a special tree, you can inject it, and the success rate on those injections is very good. As you know, so that's another conversation that we're going to have at the fair. We're not ready to have that yet. Is do we want to do these injections? Money, environment effects, and all that is a conversation we're going to need to have. As far the other parts of trying to fight it is what Glenn mentioned is SLAM, slow ash mortality, and so that's becoming, if we're very hygienic, that's an area that slows it down and gets us ready to prepare for it. Other than that, there are some biocontrols. There is a parasitic wasp that they're trying to introduce to the environment that will attack it. They're actually working on it in Forest Grove, and there is some hope for it, but again, it just slows the spread, even this parasitic. So it is here like in the East Coast, and it's not going away, and we are going to lose the ash forest. It's just slowing it down, so are we going to lose it in 5 years or 10 years, or hopefully more? But there's no silver bullet that will get rid of this.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, AJ. I know you had a third part, but hang in there. We're definitely gonna get to that one. I've got Danny next.
Hi, thank you. Concerned camper here with but I do have identified ash like in my camping area. Kevin has answered one of my questions that I had before. I will and I'm hoping listening in still for strategy for how we're going to address, like, do we need to start taking these ash trees out now? And, is that part of the plan? And I think that that's kind of layered on with AJ's question about the budget, because this stuff does take energy and money to do. So concerned about it. I do appreciate this work session. I appreciate everything that's in here. One thing I will layer on with Glenn G, I've seen the I agree with the under canopy and keeping it and making sure that campers aren't doing damage to, you know, non-ash things so that we can maintain our greenery. And that I don't really have a question, I guess, because Kevin answered it earlier about the ash borer. So I appreciate the time.
Thanks for those comments, Danny. John Pincus. Oh, sorry. Do I have John?
Okay. I just wanted to.
Hang on, John. Just a moment. I'm sorry. I had someone in the chat, George Braddock in the chat had a question. I asked him if he wanted me to read it out. George, do you want to unmute? I'm so sorry, John. I missed that one. Do you want to unmute and say your question, or would you like me to read it out?
That's okay. I'll ask. I just wondered if the emerald ash borer infected other types of trees.
No, it doesn't infect other type of trees, just other ash trees, as far as I know. Or if it does infect other trees, it's not very successful, but it's really adapted to ash specifically. The issue is, like as far as bringing the live edge wood on site, is it's really hard to tell ash from other tree species, or it can be once it's cut up for firewood. So, for example, oak looks a lot like ash. And even maple can kind of look like ash too. So the lookalikes for ash is hard. But as far as we know, as far as I know, it doesn't infect other ash trees or other types of trees.
If I can jump in, it does. Yeah. So all ash trees, you know, except for mountain ash, which is not actually an ash tree, but it also decimates olive trees. Not a big issue here, but it's a gigantic issue in California.
Thanks, Kevin. I didn't know that. Okay, John, thanks for being patient. Go for John Pincus.
Yes. I just wanted to echo the concern about the understory, both for the reasons that were mentioned, but also because if we get to the place where we do have to remove a lot of ash, we'll also be losing a lot of capacity to retain water in the soil. And so the understory is the other, besides trees themselves, is the other major, as I understand, the major component of the forest that keeps the water on our property instead of just running dust. So if we're going to end up removing a lot of trees, we absolutely need to protect the understory for the purpose of retaining water.
Thanks, John.
Hey, John, thanks. Did you have a question?
Not really a question.
Okay, so we'll have a time at the end of the presentations to take more comments and concerns, just to let everyone know. We do have some experts in the room, so if you do have questions, we're going to be taking those first. All right, on to first example strategies and moving into a plan. That's myself, Paxton, and Glenn. Let's kick us off, Glenn.
Okay, great. Well, we're just going to go through a couple of example strategies. You know, there's a lot of different ways we can respond to this. There's a lot of different, you know, even if you just took, even just what's come up here tonight, you know, protecting the brush, protecting the understory. I would step back from that and say that, you know, we really want to be focused on the forest, the trees, and not to think of all the brush and understory as one thing. So anyway, example strategies are education, like we did this summer, of providing education for fair family and fair public, in terms of slowing ash, you know, slowing the emerald ash borer movement through wood. But then I said wood management here, or as kind of capturing that inspection element, or the wood the wood management to bringing it on site. We really want to limit that. But another strategy would be just growing the next generation of forest, like Glenn G talked about, protecting the trees we have. Currently we're camping and we're stepping all over oak trees that could become our next, shade canopy. And there's, tiny baby seedling oaks, saplings up through, 5, 6, 10 feet. A lot of those are getting cut when people clear an area for a new camp or, make a new path. There's all kinds of different reasons why we're taking out a lot of the non-ash trees that we could be stewarding better. And so that strategy involves, just like Glenn pinpointed, coordinating between Vegemanics, site crew, camp crew, having a real educational effort to get the Fair family on board to steward their areas, to be identifying trees and protecting them and growing them through time. And then also, kind of as part of that, growing the next generation using our on-site nursery or moving seedlings around that are being created on site or generating seedlings ourselves. That's a strategy that we could use. Most of the people that have been studying this, we think that all these strategies are really important. That's why they're kind of here as our top example strategies of educate Fair family, manage the wood that's coming on site, and try to prevent inadvertent movement, and then growing that next generation of forest shade. And I think, those are some example strategies. As we try to figure out what to do and when and who's going to do it, it can be kind of overwhelming to try to get our brains around what it is we need to do and how we're going to do it within the time that we need to do it. And so one avenue that we have is a strategic planning process that moves us from sort of grasping at strategies and maybe not being coordinated in how we are dealing with those strategies to being coordinated on how we're implementing this response. And so I think that hopefully that cues up the next part of our session here with John Alexander.
We've got myself and Paxton taking a little dip into this first example strategies, and
go ahead.
I wanted to go ahead and share my screen here on one of them. I've been involved in several different types of educational strategies. This beautiful poster that you're seeing here is not mine. However, it was I think we can all see it now. It's part of the electronic packet that you'll find on the Fair website and that we'll send out to everyone after the presentation. But I just want to give a shout out to the high quality of materials like this. I've been involved in putting things physically on kiosks in different parts of the fair for different types of enhancement projects or educational projects. I also want to point out that, our resources in all kinds of areas and hashtag out to the stewardship area. I've been a part, and Glenn's been a part, and maybe some other people here have been a part of actually being a presenter. I tend to take on a couple different more fanciful costumes and things to kind of give out presentation materials. And I really enjoy that. I know tapping into our professional folks with music and artistry to give these types of educational messages legs and let people know that they are a resource. They are a resource for solutions. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that. I want to tap on Paxton for a second, but I want to introduce that, implementing a Don't Move Wood, we've started in on that. There's more education, obviously, that needs to go in there. Paxton's going to talk a little bit about two things: the existing firewood program. I wanted to mention that it's possible to do another revolving fund to help fund some of the things that we've been talking about here. Wouldn't be large money, but small money gets the bucket, gets us rolling. So Paxton, I'm going to tap on you to talk about firewood program and existing guideline revision.
one thing that became apparent after last year's fair was that we really need some way of identifying where suspect wood and stuff like that goes. So we have to develop a program of being able to isolate and move stuff like that. I also mentioned earlier about developing potentially a firewood collection group or a policy about how the fair can provide firewood for its own use and auxiliary fair uses also. There's definitely a demand, and if we're going to be going through losing ash trees, I think that is something that would benefit us to develop. And also there's thought, we discussed a little bit about using, firewood can fund itself. In reality, it's as a result revolving fund, as Anna mentioned. It's one of those things that is a potential that we can easily do also. So these are things that we need to start thinking about doing very, very soon.
Or that we've already started and they're in very early stages, just to let folks know these are the first examples of strategies. We're going to talk about moving into a plan, but I want to take a few Q&A, and then apologies to AJ. You had your hand up and I missed it. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. So again, I try to save it up to have a two-parter. The first part is I had heard a while back that there were traps set on site, and that those were possibly removed. And my first question is, are we going to return traps to the fair so we can, and what are the benefits of the traps or the downfalls? My second question is regarding the education piece. Has LUMP or anyone else tapped into resources at Oregon State, U of O, or Lane to work with their various programs and departments to see whether this can be an all hands on deck educational moment? Maybe we can get funding from those schools to help us as we try to navigate this issue. So those are my two-part questions.
If I can take that. I really like your questions, AJ. And one of the things with education, I think that we should add is outreach. And every time we try to educate, we are also trying to outreach. And from the very beginning, in 2022, in August, we had a meeting that I put together with Sierra, the old site manager, and we met out at the fair site with several representatives from Oregon State University and did a site tour. And ever since then, we've been working with Oregon Department of Forestry and the Department of Agriculture, which is the head organization for EAB. And everybody spirals down from there. You mentioned Lane County, and I haven't, I don't know much about Lane County doing anything yet. I'm sure they're working on it, but I don't know of any point person. But Eugene has some great people, and we've been working with them to the point where there's been 2 Emerald Ash Borer conferences in the state of Oregon. And in both conferences, the Oregon Country Fair has been mentioned as a private property owner that is being proactive and is a good example of private landowners getting ready because of our outreach. So we're Lane County needs to we need to outreach more to them. And the other part of your question was?
I could restate it. I wrote it down, but go, AJ, why don't you restate it?
Yeah, the other part of my question was around the traps.
The traps, right.
Yeah.
So the trap trees was a fantastic effort with Oregon Department of Forestry. They put out 3 traps all around our parking lots. So that's where a potential area of them coming in. And they went out and collected the traps. So these are big purple, kind of a weird thing, but the beetle is attracted to the color purple, sticky traps. And Lane County had only 3 traps in it, and they were all in Oregon Country Fair. The rest of them were north of you guys. And of all the just under 150 traps that Oregon Department of Forestry set out beyond the Ring of Fire that Glenn mentioned around Forest Grove, there were no emerald ash borer beetles collected in those. The traps are interesting because they set them up in a stressed area or an ash stressed tree. So a stressed tree is more attractive to the beetle. And then the traps are there as a magnet to collect the beetle. So we have a relationship right now with the Oregon Department of Forestry. We'll try to continue to set up traps every year with them. Otherwise, there've been grants available last year to set up our own program. It'd be interesting to talk about if we want to do that ourselves or continue the relationship with the Oregon Department of Forestry. But we'll continue with that. And it'd be nice to, in my opinion, to reach out even to the town of Anita and to the other campgrounds and expand our efforts, because this is such a communal effort. It's beyond fair. It's great to get our own house in order. Once we do, it'd be great to outreach to the other campgrounds around and show as an example of what we should be doing. Thanks.
Can I have a quick clarification? Real quick. I actually wanted to not leave Lane Community College out of the conversation because I mentioned Oregon State and U of O, and I meant to Lane Community College. All have great programs and potential arborists involved in those programs. So thank you for the information about Lane County, but I also don't want to leave out the local Lane Community College as another resource.
Thanks, AJ. Glenn, I see you have your mouth open. I just want to say time check. We're going to end at 9, so everybody can have their wonderful sleep. That's really helpful for decision making. And I wanted to move to our next section. Are you ready to do that, Glenn?
Sure.
All right. Let's introduce John Alexander, and I have a little bit of this agenda item too. So John, you want to spool up your presentation? If you're there.
Indeed, I will begin to spool up my presentation as you go, and thank you for keeping us running, because I always get nervous when I'm coming last and the time's ticking. So yeah.
Well, I can do the first part of this while you get going if you'd like.
That's great. And I'm host is disabled is the direct quote that it says here. So
okay, let's
my
see
laptop, I think it says John A presentation or something like that, whoever's in there.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try. I don't know if the other folks are alive out there yet. So
it's not the John Alexander.
You're a co-host now. The John A presentation is now the co-host. Thank you. All the folks that are helping me make this smooth. Just like a solid yay. All right, so I'm going to kick this off saying 3 to 5 years. It's about getting on the same page. As a previous board member, a couple of terms, and a long-term committee person, meaning board committees, either being on them for a long time and watching the evolution of our thought processes on land use management and planning committee. It was my first one, starting one in Peach Power with it flying its own wings. It makes me so proud, so that we have an ability to walk our talk. One of the things that I'm seeing right now through my usual large 40,000 to 60,000 foot view is that we can do a better job at our committee coordination level. So for example, and I want to say thanks for involving me in this process, because I got to be thinking, and John brought this up, that I had said putting our committees together at least once a year to kind of compare and contrast our notes. What are we working on? What do we need to work together on? And helping us with that resource sharing that board committees are so thoughtfully put together to do would be very valuable as a board of directors. If you could really help us as committee, your committee members to coordinate our work. Because as someone who's been involved as a professional in the energy and climate area for an awful long time, it is fantastic to get out there and talk the good talk. It is absolutely spine-tingling to walk the good walk. But when you're alone, or when you're in a group that's isolated from other members and trying to do this work, it can be disheartening, but it doesn't need to be. So I just want to let you guys know that we're here at LUMP, and we will continue to steward work that helps our staff and you to make great decisions or better decisions, or to bring information like this up. But it's up to you to help us with a coordinated effort. Take it away, John.
Great, thank you so much. And can you see my screen, see a slide? And
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much. I am a newcomer to this discussion, but not necessarily a newcomer to the fair. I'm a bit of a newcomer to the politics of the fair because I'm a new board member. I've been camping in the South Woods for nearly 30 years, since before Xanadu. I've seen a lot of these kind of things work. The combination of strategies to address threats. Again, I appreciate Glenn, who was mentioning the threats of us, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Early on in our fair career, when Glenn and I first started bringing concepts of birds to community village, we realized that we were impacting bird nests, and now we have the fair. Not even it was taken out of the organization that I work for, and the fair has taken it on through the stewardship and through quartermasters. Protects every single nest that we find during the building of the fair and beyond. Glenn and Aaron Holmes do that kind of thing. And then the stewardship educates people on all of the different things, and now it's been essential to educating. So this combination of what Anna's talking about education, what these guys are talking about implementing strategies, what the Vegmanics crews were just telling us about, and these opportunities, these are all things that we can do. We've done it before. But you can sense, even in the conversations that we're having tonight, where people really are, you hear about this and it's scary. And then everybody's got a lot of really good ideas and a lot of real good concerns and a lot of real good partners, and AJ's talking about partners, which are definitely people we need to reach out to, and different concerns about our strategies and our different impacts. And there's 15,000 of us out here that care deeply about this. How do we take this overwhelming situation? How do we take our under capacity to deal with this? As they said, in the beginning of this presentation, we don't have the capacity we need to deal with this in the near and long run. And how do we bring from that a sense of clarity, a sense of security, because this is a bit scary, and a sense of playbook by which we can all act on. And so in my regular life, I'm involved in conservation planning processes, and these are around migratory birds and climate change, and the fact that we've lost 3 billion birds since 1970 in the United States. Many of these migrate to Mexico and Central America, and it's overwhelming. However, we've used structured decision-making and open standards for conservation. It's a very widely used process all over the world. I'm sure it's been used for emerald ash borer situations in the Midwest, and I'm looking into that, to cut through all of these concerns, to think about all these great ideas, to give everybody an opportunity and a voice to bring their ideas so they don't have to feel like, oh man, I better get my idea out there or it's going to be forgotten. Nope. We've got a way of doing this. And it's through this process of structured decision making and conservation standards, the open standards for conservation. I'm just going to read something really quickly, and then I'm going to flip real quick through some slides just to give you guys, it's going to be a little different than what I did at the board meeting, but it's going to be a little bit of a repeat so some of the members who haven't seen this yet can understand it. How are we going to get together and get all of us on the same page, get through all of the differing ideas, do priorities and all that kind of stuff? So structured decision making is a process it's an organized approach for working together to make informed and transparent choices in complex decision-making situations. And the open standards for conservation is an adaptive management approach that lays out clear steps in the conservation planning process and focuses on engagement. And that's what's critical here, is engagement of all of the affected and interested parties. Program planning, prioritization, implementation, and evaluation. And the goal of the approach is to demonstrate the outcomes of collected action. And if we can't demonstrate the outcomes that we're looking for, how do we adapt our collective action to try to address the situation possibly in an alternative way? So Open Standards is designed to facilitate more rigorous and effective planning for conservation initiatives. This has been done in international scenarios when you've got governments and NGOs who generally are not on the same page, environmentalists and logging companies, for example, small Central American NGOs and large Mexican governments, getting people on the same stage, working through the differences and collectively identifying an approach forward so we can all move forward on something that we know, we love, and we care about. And that's the country fair. And that's our stewardship. And that's those shade trees that we camp under and that we sell under and that we party under and that some of us sleep under. And so the first part of this approach that we're proposing and what we're really proposing is using this very standardized conservation approach facilitated out of operations. So it can include all of the parties that are affected or interested or able to help us deal with this. So project planning, then management, and then monitoring to provide a framework for testing our assumptions. So we're hearing a lot of ideas here. There's a lot of science behind some of our ideas, some of our strategies. Some people might come up with some real unique and interesting new strategies that we can test. How do we learn from our testing and how do we adapt and move forward? And the first part of this, and I think this is what's been making a lot of people nervous, is there's a lot of really good ideas out there. There's a lot of people that care. I really want to appreciate, recognize the EAB team and LUMP. I'm really trying now to come in and say, here's a process we can put forward to bring everything to the table and almost learn less so I can facilitate potentially, if this is the approach we take, more in an approach for taking all of these ideas, figuring out which ones of them are short-term and long-term plans and prioritizing. And so the first part of that is identifying the interested and effective parties who need to participate in this, whose voices need to be heard. So 5 years from now, when we start implementing strategies, it's not a surprise to anybody that everybody had an opportunity to participate. The crews, the crafters, the volunteers, the campers, our committees. LUMP is a critically important committee. These are fixed assets that we're talking about out there as well. Path planning, and then the different crews out there. We heard from Glenn and we heard from others who take care of our understory and teach our campers what to do. Of course, the board needs to be a driving force in this from a policy level. And then this is something that operations and staff needs to take on. And then the neat thing I was thinking about is our ticket holders is how we radiate out then to our neighbors. Because if we do everything that we can do, we can set a good example for the Emerald Ash Borer. But if our neighbors aren't doing what we're doing and it comes to our neighbors, then there it is. So how can we collaborate with our neighbors? And then I think that, what AJ was mentioning, who are our state Pacific Northwest national and even international natural resource managers and other experts in the field that can help us cut through this process. And so the open standards process does exactly that. You bring those stakeholders to the table, we identify what our targets are. We've talked about that. Our overstory, the ash canopy, the other trees, the understory, what's threatening them, this invasive species that there's not much we can do about, maybe slow it down. But we can also camp differently in the future. I can't wait to, in the South Woods in Shameless Summer Drama Camp, start to protect my little oak trees that then my grandchildren will be swinging off of in 15 or 20 years from now, hopefully longer than shorter. How can we rank these different threats? Is it our tents that are the problem? Is it cutting things down? Is it the problem? Is it, what are the different things that we can do? Bringing in wood, taking out wood, which kind of wood, and then brainstorm strategies and outline how these can be used to reduce the threats and reduce the stressors on the target. And then we can outline how we can measure them to make sure we're pulling this off. And one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize is that we need a structured process for making a plan. The structured process for making a plan that's going to build the capacity that we need, maybe a full-time person to manage this, maybe significant amounts of dollars to come in and help us with our education. We've used this process recently to take a habitat that was being relatively ignored and now raise millions and millions of dollars to work with tribes to reduce threats to oak woodlands throughout Oregon using this process. I mean, millions of dollars. And so not that we need, well, there might, we'll identify what we need. These are also called business conservation plans. I know that word might not go over that great with some people, but I know there's a lot of people that do business out there at the Oregon Country Fair. So how do we do that and then translate this into a plan that we can use to educate ourselves, that we can use to collectively get together with each other, and then we can use to go out and get the process. So what we really want to think about, I'm just going to give you a couple examples of the modeling approach. But as I mentioned, this strategic conservation planning process can take a while. But we've identified, and the EAB folks have identified some things that we might want to think about in a rapid strategic planning approach. And as AJ said, what do we need to do now? And so this process will allow us to elevate some strategies that we're already working on, maybe others, that we can start implementing immediately, but we can do it off of a common playbook. And so what we need to understand, you can see here is our target is our forest overstory, Oregon ash. In the landscape, the Oregon Country Fair holds a big portion of a habitat, these bottomland hardwood riparian forests that Glenn was talking about, that probably more than 95, if not 99% of them in the Willamette Valley have been destroyed. So the viability of those habitats across the state of Oregon aren't that great. That's that first landscape context. But the condition of our habitats, the forest overstory specifically, is pretty darn good. But you can see that arrow. If the emerald ash borer, or when the emerald ash borer gets here, that overstory is not going to be as good as it is now. It might be poor. And as people mentioned, we might not do the best job that we could be doing with our understory, so it might be poor too. But we own a lot of it, and that's a good thing. We've got the size. And so what is our viability ranking? And then how are we going to target that viability ranking? There might not be much we can do to deal with the dead ash itself to save it. So instead, what are we going to do? We're going to we might grow new forests. We might take care of the hazards that come out by having those dead trees. We might use those for positive benefits. And so what we think about, and this is where we were talking about threats. The direct threats are the emerald ash borer itself and the reduced succession in our forests, that our younger trees in the South Woods don't get a chance to grow. We probably don't have a natural successional stages in most of the Oregon Country Fair. And why is that? Is because of what we call indirect threats, which are the human-related ones. The introduction of exotics. We can't do much about the emerald ash borer coming in to Oregon, but we might be able to do something to slow the emerald ash borer at the Oregon Country Fair. And we can do things to affect our impacts on the understory that we've already talked about. So direct threats and indirect threats. The indirect threats are human actions, and they become opportunities for action and opportunities for addressing the direct threat. And so what we do is we model those out. And we need to identify key ecological attributes. What are our indicators? For example, AJ asked about the monitoring, and Kevin's very aware. We're monitoring when is it going to get here, and once it get here, what's its abundance, what's its life cycle, and what's it doing? What does our forest overstory look like now? What's the cover? What's our large tree stem count? These are all decisions we need to make collectively. What are we going to measure? What are the things that we value in our forest? And then ash mortality. When the trees start dying, how are we going to measure that, and what are we going to do about that? And then the same thing with the understory. Is it total understory cover, or are there certain parts of the understory, as Glenn mentioned, like the hardwood trees that are growing in the understory, that we want to think about, the species composition? And so these are things that we all need to get behind, and because it's going to be a big part of it. And so what we do is then you model that out. And this part is about so you can weigh the different strategies, understand the time frames that these strategies act on, and then prioritize these strategies so we can put the limited of resources into the ones that are going to have the shortest term bang for the buck or the longest term sustainability for our forests moving into the future. So a strategy addresses those indirect human threats. How do we change our behaviors? And that immediately flows into the threat itself or the stressor. So we're going to lose. We might not be able to change in the long run. We can slow the ash borers emergence into our forests, but once it's here, then we need to deal with the stresses. We need to grow an understory that becomes our new shade canopy, and have these different targets, and then short-term outputs and long-term outcomes. Measure those and understand what they are. Agree on what they are. So don't move wood. The introduction of exotics is the indirect threat that we're addressing. We're changing our behaviors, and we're slowing the rate at which emerald ash borer causes ash mortality, and we slam it. Or we encourage natural regeneration of certain plants. And I can't wait to go into my plant. You know, when my neighbors really didn't like it, or my fellow campers really didn't like it when I asked them to move the tent to save that Swainson's thrush nest. But now they love it, and we watch the Swainson's thrush grow and have its eggs and have its babies every year. Well, the same thing is going to be true with our little oak trees and maybe our little ash trees and maybe our little maples in our camp that are going to get bigger and bigger. So this one's not going to address the threat, but it's going to address the stressor, and it's going to have a target that we'll be able to address all together. There's many of these strategies that we need to weigh, and what this process is going to do is allow everybody to have a voice who chooses to come and list all of these, what we call enabling strategies. We need to educate, we need to partner, we need to study and monitor, we need to collaborate. And then there's the implementation. We might not want to do anything, or we might want to implement these SLAM practices as we're already doing, or propagate plants, or let natural regeneration. There might be some more hands-on management, like Paxton talked about, that we want to weigh those alternatives and bring people into the discussion, so people who might not want to do such active management have the voice that they can put to the table, along with the people who think we really need to start cutting firewood tomorrow. And take our time now, not too much time, to go through this structured decision-making process and give Kirsten and operations and all of our crews the tools that they need to, first of all, get the capacities to address this issue, and second of all, for us all to get in line, and that might not sound good, let's call it in a second line, to Mardi Gras our way right down through this thing and help it to happen. And so we do need to act, but we aren't just going to jump right into this thing, but we do propose integrating a rapid strategic planning process to identify some of the recommendations that have been put forth by the EAB and LUMP team, to see if those are truly the things we want to put our resources to in the first year while we're still going through this conservation planning process, and make sure that all of the interested and affected parties are on board with these priority strategies. We need to increase our capacities and start bringing some resources in to get this done. We need to understand what the indicators are and start measuring them, so we know when it comes what it's actually doing. So that is the proposed process. And hopefully this is something that the board will get behind, and that all of our fair family will get behind, because this is a different situation than anything I think we've ever dealt with, though I'm still continuing to learn a lot from our elders and other people about all the sorts of things that we have dealt with in the past. So thank you all for what you do. Thank you for this opportunity. There might be some questions there. I'm going to escape out of that thing and slow her down.
Thanks, John. I want to take just a few questions and then tap out and let AJ close out the meeting. So I'm gonna hold time so that there's at least 10 minutes, AJ, at the end for you to close us out. Does that sound about right?
That sounds great. Sorry.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm looking around. I'll take the cue for any Q&A. I see we've got a new message here. AJ's got their hand, so let's go for AJ and then John Steinhardt.
I am apologizing. My fingers were a little off.
Okay.
So I've got a couple of things. I think first I want to thank you guys for everybody for this tonight. I think having educational pieces like this is an amazing effort and a feat to try to educate everyone that's involved. And so I appreciate the efforts. The second thing I wanted to acknowledge is something that I think I'm hearing, but I don't want to put words in anybody's mouths. And one of the biggest challenges we have here is coordination and communication. And so I wanted to just state real quickly that I think that is one of the biggest challenges we're going to have here, is that the beautiful thing about our fair is that we have so many people that are vested and interested in big issues like this and big things affecting us. And so I wanted to know from this group of folks, if anybody can answer the question of how can we really simply create a situation where we have a point person, for instance, our site manager, like a point person that is really responsible for the coordination of our efforts going forward. Maybe not the whole big arena, but we have so many committees and the board can do so much to coordinate a singular message or a singular position on what's next. So what are you doing to simplify this message and create like a point person for the work that needs to be done?
I'm gonna tap in just a little bit on that one, then we'll take I'm sorry, somebody else was
that was me, but go for it, Anna, and then I could jump into this, John.
So AJ, the committee structure for LUMP has always included the site manager. We do a site report. When we heard from Alexis in our last meeting in November, they indicated that Kirsten had been talking with them about this issue. So I think from the board's point of view, one of the things to bring up our discussion point at the top, the purpose, is to make sure that the board itself is having that those expectations that you have for a point person aligned with what operations may already be doing. So I'll just say it that way, and then go for John.
Yeah, so I would just say that one of the things I've been talking to Kirsten about is that's why the recommendation that I'm making, that I've been talking with the EAB folks and then indirectly with LUMP through them, is that this strategic action planning process be implemented through operations. And what you just mentioned, AJ, is what we call an enabling strategy. We want a point person. And I don't think that, I don't know, but maybe, and when we get into the collective process of talking about this with all of the interested and affected parties, that maybe it's too much for the site manager alone. Maybe the site manager needs an employee who is the point person on these. Those are the kind of enabling strategies that we need to put together, but it needs to be somebody who can coordinate. And then I think the other thing is that I've been sensing, and I feel it too, is this sense of urgency. Well, we need this and we need that. And urgency almost becomes fear. And what we need to not be fearful and not feel anxious and urgent is to have a clear message and a clear plan that Kirsten and operations can move off of, that all of the affected and interested parties feels like they had a participatory role in it, even though they might not get all their ways, and even though they might not be into all the strategy that will be implemented. It is a process for prioritization that allows that to happen. So we don't have to be like feeling urgent and feeling fearful. Instead, we'll have a very simple plan that will be translated. These boxes and arrows aren't it for everybody, but it's the first step you take, and then you translate it to somebody that we can take to the governor's task force and be like, we're a significant landowner. Let's roll with this thing now. We need to make this happen because we're on the leading edge of saving the 1% of the bottomland hardwood forests that are left in Oregon in the face of this novel threat.
Kirsten? Oh, I just saw your face. I'm like, oh, if you have something to say, just please let us know. Okay, great. I'm going to move to John Steinhardt. Go for John.
Hi, three things. Well, first of all, thanks. And I really appreciate you guys scrambling to work on the foreign wood issue, because that's the best thing we can do right now. I would really support having some sort of coordinating committee or body, whether that's under Kirsten or somebody else, because this isn't just, there's a lot of side effects of this. I think something I brought up the last time I was in one of these meetings is we're going to have to stabilize our riverbanks, and at least from my talking to the Forest Service about my property, Quaking Aspen is a great place to do that, but I wouldn't want you to, a great tree to plant for that, but I certainly wouldn't want you planting that anywhere we're going to be burying water pipes or internet, because we can't move forward doing things as long as we keep destroying the stuff we've already put in place. I'd really like, I think we need some sort of site coordination committee that makes sure that everything we do touches on all the affected parties. Second thing, I have to throw this in for John, because my job is to shed light and not disaster, is that even though this is a horrible thing, it also is possibly an opportunity. And I would like to see somebody, I'm not sure who does this, draw up some scenario maps of what would happen if the ash trees were all gone and we didn't replant, and how we would rearrange our fair to use the newly open area. One of the things that's been obvious to me for a long time is we could use a main stage that would be big enough to fit the crowd that shows up there. So I think we need to balance, are we going to plant different trees and try to keep our current woods a different kind of woods? Or are we going to take advantage of new open areas and maybe use the oak areas as shady areas in the future? So I kind of like to see what it would look like. I've seen the maps that show where we're going to lose the ash trees, but I haven't seen anybody sketch out what we would do in the worst case if that happened and how we might use it. And that would help a lot with decision making. The last thing, just because I didn't see a meeting review on the agenda, this is the third or fourth time I've seen this presentation, and I would ask that in the future, maybe you could divide it into a beginner's portion and then a new stuff portion, because it's kind of hard to not glaze over seeing the same presentation again and again and again, and it would let people use their time more wisely to come in an hour in after you've gone over the original material for the newbies. So that's it. Thanks. Good job.
Just to make sure, John, John Steinhardt, there wasn't a question there. Thank you for the comments.
No, those are things to think about in planning stuff. I've seen this before and asked questions. So, yeah.
John Pincus.
Yeah, well, I have a question, couple of questions. And maybe, but my question is, have we had any movement to up our game in terms of growing new trees? We have a wonderful nursery that's been started, but certainly the capacity is way too small for what the likely need is going to be. And it takes a while to make that happen. So my question is anybody moving to increase our capacity to grow starts for replanting?
John?
Yes.
Glenn can answer that. Then you can ask your next question if you'd like.
Okay.
I'm going to kick it over to Glenn, the other Glenn. I mean, but if he wants to, I mean.
Yeah, no. So right now, there's some truth to what you're saying, John. But right now, we actually have a lot of plants that we need to get in the ground. We actually have a bottleneck in the nursery. We need to get plants in the ground, and to get those plants in the ground, we need to actually identify in a line on where those those trees are getting planted, so that they're on somebody's radar, because you just can't plant them and forget them. They take some tending. So we're working on logistics like that. But right now, we're actually looking for a place to land 20 plus trees next month. But then this goes right back to, I think I want to say some support. There was some talk about maybe I would be going to the site manager for this, but it is going to be a lot. And I think the care and the nurturing of these trees and kind of managing all that is going to when we get into full swing, that's going to be some serious business. So I guess what I'm saying is, as Vegmanics, what we need is some guidance as to where to lay down plants, because lump gets involved. Where do we want to put them inside the fair? Do we want to put them outside the fair? What's that strategy around the locating of them at the current time in preparation, in coordination with all of this? So we could ramp up. We can ramp up our operations in the nursery just fine. The problem is we got to find a place to plant them that we can nurture them over time. I'm done. Thank you, Glenn.
I would just follow up that, you know, the nursery project itself, you know, that's a good example of moving that through the process that John Alexander talked about. Like, how many trees can we grow? How much, you know, resources will that take? Should we go all in on that, you know, or should we go all in on the trees that are just naturally there? Like, I tend more toward the, like, let's go all in on the trees that are there. For every nursery tree we can get going, I would bet we can get 1,000 trees on site that aren't nursery trees, that don't require that moving it around. But maybe they're not in the perfect place. So moving some trees is good. But all that to say, those are different parts of the overall strategy of, like, let's really grow the next generation, and whether you like how you're dividing up your capacity toward nursery plants or towards, you know, outreach for campers that are in place and getting the trees that are there naturally stewarded. So I think it's a combination there.
All right, John, Pincus, did you have another question?
Yeah. Well, just to follow along that question a little bit, my expectation is that we'll need both modes for that. So the basic question was, is anybody moving to up the capacity right now? Is there any organizing?
I think the short answer is yes. However, the capacity, we need the short-term strategic planning to ramp up the capacity to meet the potential need.
So my next question has to do with financial resources. I heard it mentioned that there's been some contact with the city of Eugene. Given the orientation of the current county. I wouldn't expect a lot of aggressive or proactive thinking from them specifically. But I think the city of Eugene is taking a much more active approach. However, I talked to Matt Rivers, who deals with this stuff with the city a few months back, and they had not yet formalized the plan. So, but that may have something to do with a collaborative effort, as was mentioned, resource acquisition as well. So I just kind of wondered if there's more interaction with the city particular plan at this point, since we haven't been on.
Hey, John Pincus, you were pretty broken up. I think what you're asking is beyond the city of Eugene, what are some other funding strategies? And I would say that we need to do that planning and reach out. We're thinking of the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, the Longtown Watershed Council, which then feeds into state money. And we really want to work with our partners like the city of Veneta, we have had very successful partnerships with them in the past. We are still building that capacity. And that's one of the asks here, is to kind of look at what the capacity is of our staff to assist with building those funding partnerships. Also for our board of directors to start maybe small, but meaningful for this fiscal year in some of the short-term strategies, or the ones that we've got on, that we're building right now. They're not necessarily coordinated, John, but they are out. There are things out there. And this meeting is intended to assist the board and the operations staff to kind of circle the wagon, so to speak, or circle up resources. And I'll tap on someone else to potentially answer that. Hopefully I've got your question right. It was hard to hear you.
Well, my question was actually, is there any specific contact with the city of Eugene planned in the near future? So maybe somebody.
The answer would be yes to that. Thank you.
And then I just wanted to very briefly say, I consider all land use planning to actually be a governance function, but of course the governance bodies would normally direct operations to operationalize the directions and policies the governance body arrives at. So that's just my perspective. I have a lot of thoughts on all this, so I'll probably write it to them. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Glenn? I had Glenn in the queue. Glenn G.
I think we've got covered much of what I would be asking or would be directing to, other than, yeah, we need to kind of find a way to ramp our nursery and throughput of how we're doing this. And it's going to be a lot easier and cheaper to let Mother Nature do it. But that comes back to management, education, and other things that I think at some level I'm asking for help on, because I could shout about this all day, but until people's behaviors change, I'm just spouting stuff. So I think really some heart-to-heart type of discussions on how we are managing this with the crews who think we can cut is in order.
Thanks, Glenn. I just want to say, everyone here, thank you so much for putting your time. It's precious. You have been heard. We have been recorded on Zoom and we have been live streamed. I want to tap into just a big heap of gratitude for everyone that's here right now. And certainly we'll be continuing this work in the LUMP and in the EAB subcommittee and work group. AJ, want to say thank you so much for having us over, so to speak, and I'm going to bounce the meeting to you.
All right. Again, gratitude to all the presenters and everybody who asked questions tonight. I would like to have a meeting evaluation, but that is going to be 15 seconds a person, so we can close this thing out on time, and then I'll end it then. So let's, if you would like to have a meeting evaluation, please raise your hand in the chat. Remember, try to keep it to 15 seconds so everybody has a chance. We'll start with Sue.
I really want to thank everybody who had input for this meeting. This is a huge threat, and I'm glad we're organizing so that we just don't go screaming and panicking down the 8. Take care, all.
All right. Anyone else? Oh, okay.
I just saw Paxton raise his hand in a non-chatty kind of way.
Okay, Paxton.
I tried to raise it by chat, but what I wanted to say is I had a very good meeting. Thank you. I think we're moving forward. I wanted to say that if we truly wanted to honor the Kalapuya and their land, we would turn our land back into an oak and savanna with camas underneath. And from the map that was very first shown that Rosanna, the aerial photo that created, you can actually see the way the site originally was thousands of years ago. Thank you.
All right. Foxy.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to say that I had a lot of questions going into this and they were answered. So well done by the presenters. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. Seeing no more hands, I do want to close us out with a simple, I think, message, and that is that teamwork makes the dream work. And so I know that there are a lot of people, like I said, invested in this with a whole lot of ideas, but none of this gets solved without teamwork and collaboration. And so I encourage us to continue to be, even when we feel passionate about one way, to be open to thinking about things in a different way. So that collaboration leads to teamwork and the dream happening. Thank you all for being here tonight and have a great evening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Great meeting.